But when I looked at this, and we interviewed Jonathan Dover, the Navajo Ranger, and he had one story that really impacted me to this day. He says on the Navajo ranch, there's a report of a shadow creature coming up from the ground. Okay, and then it materialized. It became solid, flesh and bone, and they said it was a Bigfoot. So John Dover went over there and his partner, and they investigated, and they tracked it for I don't know how many miles. And he said the footprints just disappeared. It's nothing. So my thing with this is just my opinion. I think some of these Bigfoot are unsanctioned creations that have angelic powers.
Disclaimer to the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you?
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want.
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Alrighty, in 3, 2, 1. Coming from the great American Southwest, from the very low desert. Good morning, good evening, whatever the case may be, to all my listeners around the world. I am your host, Lionel Tavares, and as always, extremely glad and blessed to be here by the Lord Jesus Christ himself. So tonight, or for us, it's the afternoon out here in California. We have a very great episode. I always like when we get people on the show that talk about just a subject that I never even thought about, or, never thought about thinking in that kind of certain terms. So we have a guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but he has a big following. He just wrote his own book, and it connects the, all the bloodlines and all the different things with cryptids to the bloodline of Esau. So let's get moving. All righty. This is the show. We are ready to get started. So our guest is right here hanging on the line. So please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us where to find your websites, your links, and your new book and all that good stuff.
Hey, first off, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. I followed you guys on Instagram for a while. I've been liking your stuff and watching your stuff. And a lot of the guests that we both have are mutual. So a lot of the stuff we talk about is in the same vein. So I was eager to get in contact with you guys. So thank you for allowing me to come on your show and talk to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, you're welcome.
Yeah,
like
but the name's Justin. That name's Justin Brown. Kind of over the years, just deep diving research and talking to these authors and researchers, with guys with the 10,000 plus hours. I'm living the dream, but I kind of earned the name Doc, so a lot of people just call me Doc Brown. But yeah, man, my first podcast adventure was in 2022 with a couple of my buddies called the Dig Bible Podcast. We done that for about 2 years, and then the Bible studies were awesome, but it wasn't enough for me. I'm a glutton for punishment. I wanted to look through ancient lost civilizations, history, cryptids, conspiracy theory, all those other fascinating topics, but just filter those through a biblical lens. So the Prometheus lens was born. It's now a year old, and that ended up resulting in me writing my first book, The Epic of Esau, The Birthright and Seed War. It's been out for 1 month now. Yeah, people have just been following me since 2022. I kind of called it the hero's journey. You get to see me on my journey of discovery and searching through the treasures and looking for the gold nuggets in God's word. It's been an amazing journey so far.
Amen. Amen. It's always a crazy journey, where you start and then where you're at now. You're never like, man, was I ever going to be here? It's kind of amazing when you think about it. It's really amazing. So moving forward. So, let's talk about your book. I mean, I know who Esau is. I know the story of, of the battle between the the two brothers and his birthright getting taken away. I've read the extra apocryphal books, and they kind of describe Esau looking like in the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees, I think. He's like described, even though those are not they say they're not canonical books or inspired books, but I mean, you can use them for references. I would say, in my opinion, and the way he's described is he's like this pale, redheaded looking hairy guy or something like that. At least to what I read.
Well, yeah, I mean, even the book of Genesis, his birth alone is strange to say the least. I mean, it says he come out red, covered in hair from head to toe like a hairy cloak. And even as a kid, I was asking questions about this guy, but I was, told from a very whitewashed point of view that, he was just a guy with a full beard, or he had hairy arms, or everybody's got that uncle that when he goes to the beach or the pool and he takes his shirt off, he's got that little light wool sweater on his back, that was Esau. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago, I was with my friends on the Dig Bible podcast. We had Trey Smith from God in a Nutshell on the show. And
Wow.
he kind of made a little joke, and he was like, yeah, you boys are from East Tennessee. That's Bigfoot country. Maybe I'll come down there and we'll go on a Bigfoot hunt and we'll record it and make a documentary. And I was like, yeah, man, that'd be fun. Come on down. And just out of nowhere, Genesis 25:25 popped into my head, and it hit me totally different. And I was like, in the words of Dr. Michael Heiser, if we, read the Bible like a kid, reading it for the first time, like we're reading a fantasy novel, and just let the text say what it says, remove our preconceived notions and our dogma and our teachings, that's the best way we're going to understand it. And it did. I was like, man, he's covered in red hair all over from head to toe. I mean, that sounds like a Sasquatch to me.
Yeah.
So I said that to Trey, I'm like, what do you think? You think Esau might have been like the first Bigfoot? And he kind of laughed, and it ended up just, long story short, it's just I kept finding all these other little things. I kept finding, like at the Epic of Gilgamesh, you bump into this guy named Enkidu. Sounds a lot like Esau. Has this epic battle with the king Gilgamesh. And then, like you said, you get into the book of Jasher. That's a mirrored image story, I think, because whoever's telling the story is going to spin it positively in their favor. Because the book of Jasher says that Nimrod, he was the mighty hunter. This was the claim of fame of Esau also. So it's kind of like this is the Highlander. There can only be one mighty man. So they clash and they battle. But in the story of the book of Jasher, Esau chops off Nimrod's head and kills two of his Gibborim, the same word used to describe the Nephilim giants. So this man, this hairy quote unquote man, kills 3 giants single-handedly in combat. And it says that he takes the time to steal Nimrod's garments. And they said these garments were the reason that he was able to be a mighty man and able to prevail over all the nations. And then he goes back home, hides the garments, and then there's where it ties perfectly into the book of Genesis and the trading of the birthright. And I was like, this makes a lot more sense to me, because he just killed the king. He's on the run. He's afraid for his life. Probably sustained some life-threatening injuries from this exchange with these 3 giants. He thought he was going to die. He was scared to death. So he was trading his birthright to his brother, basically to sew up my wounds, give me some food, hide me. And that's why he even said in the book of Genesis, what use is a birthright to me when I'm dead? Take it. And so immediately my curiosity was sparked. So I just went digging through all these other extra biblical books and Louis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, and just started gathering all these puzzle pieces to this enigmatic character, man.
That's like a really big rabbit hole to go down. It's always like a certain, there's always certain people, I think, that are meant to go certain rabbit holes. Because I think certain people, when God chooses them, he chooses a type of person that's going to deliver the message correctly. So I always think that when someone goes down a rabbit hole like that a lot of people haven't done, I think that's like a revelation for you're being chosen to do that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's just the way I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, because it's kind of just like all these little things was revealed to me just in bits and pieces at a time. I discovered, that Genesis 25:25 passage in that new light. I bumped into that story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then right after that, it was maybe a week later, I discovered that story in the book of Jasher. And I was like, man, I have to just go on a deep dive with this guy. I have to find out, all the stories and bits and pieces. And I'm a firm believer, like you mentioned, these extra biblical books, they're not in our quote unquote canon. But Michael Heiser says something that's really stuck with me. He says, something doesn't have to be divine inspired to be important. For historical contexts, for cultural contexts, and to better understand the people of the time that were reading this book and writing this book, to get a proper understanding from our modern viewpoint. And even with the giants, that's something that in our circles that everybody's fascinated with. But if we just went off the book of Genesis and the Bible, we just get small little blurbs, in Genesis 6. And I think that's because the writers felt they didn't need to theoretically beat a dead horse, because they had all these other scrolls floating around, like the book of Enoch. And they had the oral traditions. So the writer was like, I don't really need to go into great detail about that. Everybody knows about the giants and that story. They wasn't thinking about us 1,000 years later. So I think that's the case with Esau and many other things in this biblical text.
So with that rebuttal right there, this is my opinion. When you said we only get a little piece of the Bible, what these things look like, my opinion is because the people that were writing it were closer to the times when these things were walking around. And I didn't think they really had to go into too much detail, because they were witnessing these things when they were witnessing, some of these people were witnessing these creatures. So it's like they didn't have to put too much detail, because everybody knew what they were talking about. Does that make any sense? That's what I think that is. But at the same time, like when people say, oh, you can't, you're not supposed to read the apocrypha, it's a sin, blah, blah, blah. And I tell those people, why not? Like, we were using it for reference. So if that's the case, then you're not allowed to read any book at all other than the Bible. You're only allowed to read the Bible, and you can't have no one else's opinion or no one's input. You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to say I can't read that, but then you're going to go read, Trey Smith's book? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. And the thing is, we have many references too, because when we read our 66 book canon, and that's the thing. I mean, people, if we're going to be, theologically honest, there was no Bible. There was just a bunch of scrolls that people put together and made this book. And these apocryphal texts were just scrolls that didn't, make the cut. And so they were in circulation, and the writers were reading them. And that's why I think you get references to them in your canon. The book of Enoch, is referenced several times. It's even directly quoted by Jude, who was Jesus's half brother. And I jokingly tell people, if it was good enough for Jesus's brother, it's good enough for me. Paul quotes from it. Jesus makes allusions to it that a lot of people theorize and postulate that he was quoting from the book of Enoch. In 1 Kings, it gets lost in translations, but it says, is this story not quoted in the book of Yashar? It's talking about Jasher.
The sun, when the sun holds still. Yeah, it says that, as it is written in the book of Jasher. Yeah, it does say that.
So, the writers were reading these texts and they were familiar with them. And so when I was going through and studying that, and my very first question was, what was so special about these garments that he had to take them from Nimrod? And it was really cool. I kept reading in through the book of Jasher, and shortly after that encounter, it fills you in on it. And it basically tells you that these garments were the supernatural garments from the Garden of God that was given to Adam and Eve as their covering. And it was passed through the lineage as the symbol of kingship and priesthood. And this was the birthright. And they trace this is passed to the eldest son. And they trace it all the way through. It comes through Enoch to Methuselah to Noah. And it says that Noah has them on the boat and takes them through the flood. And that it's in Ham's going out that Ham steals the garments. And that he gives them to Cush. And that Cush conceals them. And that he has Nimrod in his old age. And it uses this phrase that's really common in the Bible, and you find it a lot, and one that really stands out in my mind is Joseph, because it says, that this was the child of his old age, and whom he loved exceedingly. And that's what it says about Nimrod concerning Cush. And it says that Nimrod was the child of Cush's old age, whom he loved exceedingly. And he bestowed upon him the garments. And it says, at the coming of age, at 20 years old, Nimrod put on the garments, and he then becomes a Gibborim. And that's why a lot of people in our circles, ask that question, because in Genesis, it doesn't say that he was born a Gibborim. It says he becomes a Gibborim. And a lot of people, postulate, was this, magic? Was this sexual occult rites? There's all kinds of things that they postulate what made him become a Nephilim or a Gibborim. But the book of Jasher attributes it to these garments.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing that you're bringing up, because when I read the book, first of all, let me just tell you, man, the book of Jasher is probably one of my favorite apocryphal books I've ever read, because it is just so epic. Well, the battles where Judah, he gets that rock, like the weight of the rock is like a 90-pound rock, throws it like a baseball, knocks that guy off the horse, fighting 20 dudes at the same time. I mean, even if half of that is real, it's amazing. If anybody hasn't read the book of Jasher, go out there and read it. It is a Lord of the Rings epic battle, every other chapter times 1,000. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very epic book. But yeah, moving forward with the whole thing with the skin, I don't know if I'm correct or not, but I believe wasn't the skin taken from the serpent?
Yes.
Was it like a snake? It was like a snake skin, right?
Yeah, and that was honestly one of the biggest mind blow moments of my research, because as I was reading that, I was like, okay, now I have to go back to the garden and take a closer look at these coverings. And I started just forming like ideas in my head, and then I started thinking about Ezekiel 28, and the scholarship is 98.8% on this, if not 100%, that they was talking to Satan. Yeah, the first half, it's a condemnation to the king of Tyre, but halfway through, the wording changes. He's no longer talking to a human. He's talking to a spiritual entity behind this king, which is Satan. And it says, you were in the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. Beryl, onyx, topaz, jasper. It names all these stones. Well, our English translation lists 9 stones. But when you go to the Septuagint, it lists 12 stones. And this sounds identical to the priestly ephod. And when you go to the Hebrew, this serpent in English, in Hebrew, is nakash. And nakash can mean serpent, but it can also mean the shining one, or the one who practices divination. And if you take that garment that Satan is described to be wearing in Ezekiel 28, I mean, it fits the bill perfectly. These multicolored stones, it said there was gold inlays, and they were perfect the day that he was created, till iniquity was found in him. And so he's got this priestly ephod on. And then it even says that he profaned his sanctuaries. Amongst the stones of fire he walked. It's painting Satan in a priestly role. So I was just kind of thinking in my head, I was like, could it be that at the fall, Satan was demoted, kicked out of his priestly position, and dominion and priesthood was given to his quote-unquote younger brother, who he tried to trick and deceive? And that kind of goes with the micro-narrative of all of Scripture. Time and time again, the elder brother, in the bigger picture, the angelic race, the micro-narrative, the humans, the elder brother is always displaced and God favors the younger. And so it kind of even matches this micro-narrative through the biblical text. And so once I started reading through Jasher, I found it says, and there's just outright, that these coverings were the skins of the serpent, the coverings of the Nakash. And I was like, oh man, that's awesome. Holy Spirit confirmation right there. And so as I got to digging and just going through all this stuff, and all these things just kept, revealing itself to me. And it just answered so many ambiguous questions with the Bible. And you get to the trading of the birthright, and then even the blessing because even to this day, there's people, when I bring this up, they try to tell me concerning the Sasquatch idea, If you've seen the description of this guy out in the street or in the woods, without hesitation, that's what you would say. You would say, I seen a Sasquatch, I seen a Bigfoot. And no, that was hyperbole. That was just poetic language is what that was. Well, how do you explain the deception of Jacob and Rebekah? Rebekah tells Jacob, to go in and fool their blind father, and his response is very telling. He says, no, mother, I am a smooth man. He said, and if I go in and my father finds out that I'm playing a trick, he said, a curse will befall upon me instead of a blessing. And she says, well, if there is a curse, let the curse fall upon me. Just do as I say. And they wrap him in this goat fur like a blanket. So, he was literally that hairy. And those garments are in that story too. And it wasn't until I had the glasses to see it. Because when you go back and read that story, like the cherry on top, it says that Rebekah then goes into Esau's tent and takes one of his special garments and places it upon Jacob. And Jacob goes in, and Isaac's like, I feel my son Esau, but I hear my son Jacob. He says, but I smell my son Esau. You smell of the field, so therefore I know you are my son. And you hear all these stories about these Sasquatch encounters and the smells. I thought that was kind of a nose point there.
They usually smell like they say they smell just like very bad, like a disgusting BO type of smell, right? Or like death, even like a dead body. Sometimes they smell like as the things I've heard from the people I've interviewed. But I know, Dominic, I know you want to say something. Go ahead and interject.
Well, when this was all happening with the Edomites, what I understand is they commingled with the Horites. These are the hybrid Nephilim, known as the cave dwellers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a possibility that the line of Esau has commingled with this hybrid race. And you go further into history, well, actually forward, and when we interviewed people like Ron Moorhead, I asked him about this. I said, is it possible that these entities are mating with the natives? Because he says that the natives, they report that the women are being stolen. And he says, yes. And I said, okay. Have you ever come upon 6-finger or 6-toe prints? He said, yes. So for me, that's a Nephilim. But there's other creatures that look more human. You got the Bigfoot, right? That's like a 12-footer. I think that's like the rich bloodline. And I think the smaller ones report like 6 foot, 6.5. I think those are more human. But when I looked at this, and we interviewed Jonathan Dover, the Navajo Ranger, and he had one story that really impacted me to this day. He says there's a report of a shadow creature coming up from the ground, and then it materialized. It became solid flesh and bone, and they said it was a Bigfoot. So John Dover went over there and his partner, and they investigated, and they tracked it for I don't know how many miles. And he says the footprints just disappeared. It's nothing. My thing with this is just my opinion. I think some of these Bigfoot are unsanctioned creations that have angelic powers, because I don't think, if God would have created elephants and gorillas and lions to just come out of the ground and become flesh and bone, okay, that's his creation. But this is something more spiritual. Yes. For me, this comes from the rebel sons of God. But some of them could be more human that don't have that ability. I don't know. All this is just conjecture, really. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to go by what like people like Ron Moorhead say and Jonathan Dover and others who've seen these things. And I don't know, man. They are out there, and I think when they do this thing, when people see them in the forest and they blend in and disappear, that could be the hair follicle matching. Chameleon type of thing, according to D.A. Roberts.
Well, that's a fact that multiple people have seen them, like they look like Predator, like the movie Predator, where you could see them, but they're kind of like warpy a little bit. That's what they say.
Yeah, so you got that going on, and then you got what Jonathan Dover said, that these things, they come out of the ground, man, as a shadow person.
Like shades.
It's great. It's crazy, man. Doing your research, what do you make of all of this?
Hey, really quick, Don.
And I'm glad you brought that up.
Really quick, Don, can you mute your mic because I can hear you echoing. I can hear you breathing. All right, go ahead.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that was the next thing I was going to go into. Because after he loses the blessing, Esau kind of goes into full rebellion. And like you said, he takes 3 wives, and 2 of them are Nephilim giant tribes, Horites and Hivites. And one of the father-in-laws mentioned, he's a chieftain of a giant clan. And he says he hails from the land of Mount Seir. And when you dive into the etymology of that name, that means hairy.
Wow.
Yeah. So here you have this hairy, quote unquote, Sasquatch looking guy marrying into Nephilim giant tribes and breeding with them. And these tribes are already known to be tall and hairy. Okay. So you have a really high likelihood of throwing some really strange pups, to say the least. Okay. And when you follow that genealogy, here's where you get the famous Amalek, the mighty warrior, known for his ruthlessness. And he births the famous tribe that is named after him, the Amalekites, which when you go into the etymology of that is even more interesting. In Hebrew, that name means the blood lickers. So it even has a vampiristic feel to it. And when you go through the Bible, it says plainly in there that these were the first people to attack God's chosen people when they were in their wilderness wanderings, when they come out of Egypt. And while they're in their wilderness wanderings, here's where you get all your laws from God. Do not do this, do not do that. You don't get rules, laws, regulations unless those things, those rules, laws, and regulations are being broken. Those things are being done. Otherwise, there wouldn't be laws to tell you not to do them to begin with. And when you go into the writings of like Rashi, he talks about these Amalekites were known sorcerers. And he said that's why they were given the command to devout them to harem, that devout them to destruction, kill every man, woman, child, and animal, because they were sorcerers. They were known to shapeshift into animals to evade capture. So I think we already know from the biblical text that they were having encounters with these people, these hairy, quote unquote, Nephilim giant tribe Amalekites who interbred with the Sasquatch people of Esau. We know that they were sorcerers already. And then you get all these laws and rules. What are those laws and rules? If you take a look at them, what does it say? No longer will you sacrifice to hairy goat demons. I think it's talking about those Amalekite people. And then it says, no longer, you will not drink the blood, the life forces in the blood. You will not seek necromancers and sorcerers. You will not pass your children through the fire. I think that's all the practices of these Amalekites. And God's people were seeing them, interacting with them, and starting to adopt some of their practices. And God stepped in and was like, no, you can't be doing this. And I think the book of Isaiah even talks about them, because it says, when you go into the Greek, it says that the satyrs and the wild men will dance in the wilderness and in the desolate cities. And when they have this epic war, they finally go to battle with these Amalekites. It's only through the supernatural aid of God and Moses' supernatural rod that they're even able to beat these Nephilim hairy giant tribe, because it says this is that famous story where Moses has to stand on the mountain and hold that rod over his head. And when he would grow tired and lower the rod, the Amalekites would start to win again. So I think there was this whole supernatural Lord of the Rings battle of the sorcerers going on underneath those pages that we don't see. In the valley was the war, but the real battle was Moses up on that mountain with that rod and with the help of Yahweh. And on the other side of the mountain was the high priestess or sorcerer of the Amalekites, and they were doing battle against each other.
Yeah, that's wild.
So
man.
that's, I think, why you see all that stuff you were talking about, Dominic, with if we believe that these are interbred Nephilim bloodlines, according to the book of Enoch, it says that their spirits are not earthly or heavenly. So they're cursed to wander here. So, of course, they're going to take a familiar form. And that can explain them phasing in and out of reality. And if there is maybe a remnant of these people left, they're known sorcerers.
But, really quick before Dom, you interject. Have you watched that new show, House of David? Doc Brown? So they just started a new show called House of David, and it's about David and his whole journey through him becoming king. And that's funny because the recent episode, it's the episode, or it's the part in the Bible where they fight the Amalekites. And the way they're depicted in the show is they're like this like very heathenistic cannibal tribe. And they're all a bunch of they look like a bunch of shamans, like wizards. So it's kind of crazy that's like the first show I've ever seen that actually depicts the Bible the way it would be. Some people think Goliath, he was actually only like 6'5". No, he was way bigger than that. So the show really, really gets the grasp of what the Bible's describing. But all that stuff you're telling me right now, I'm learning. So Dominic is way more advanced in all this stuff. So Don, I would like to hear what you have to say to that. You gotta mute yourself.
Well, there were sorcerers back then, like the Witch of Endor. There were many sorcerers back in those times. I think that it wasn't only the line of Esau here in the Americas, but there's also the red-headed giants. There were the blonde hair, blue eyes, the Amalekites, and so many other giants that were around here. They were all so evil and so bloodthirsty. But these weren't the only Nephilim. During the time of Joshua, he fought all these monsters, and he didn't finish the job. He got too old, and eventually he died. Later on came King David, and he had to deal with the Philistines, Goliath and his brothers. But also, when King David was fighting these giant tribes, he had to deal with the lion men of Moab, men with faces like lion. I mean, what is that? Men with faces like lion. So the lion men of Moab. Then you had the lion men of Gad. And I'm building something here. So we did a show on the lion men of Gad and the Moab with Gary Wayne. And I read stuff from the Bible. I go, okay, Gary, were any of these lion men fighting with David? And he said, yes. He says the lion men of Gad, and it's in the Bible. So the lion men of Gad. So does that make? Because I know some people in space think that. Everyone's got their own opinion, but a lot of people believe that these Nephilim. When I say Nephilim, I'm talking about all of them. I'm talking about Goat Man, Dog Man, Rakes, and whatever, man, whatever's out there. When you look at the lion of Gad, if they were friendly and fighting with King David, does that mean they could be redeemed? I don't know, man, because if they don't have a spirit from God, that's only something God can answer. Like with Bigfoot and Dog Man, I think that thing is just whatever it is. It comes back from the ancient times. Like what was the guy's name that Marco Polo or something? Goes way back.
Oh yeah, even Christopher Columbus. What do you call it? Christopher Columbus and just the conquistadors in general. And then what's the other guy that conquered the world? Alexander the Great. They all talked about seeing and even capturing these dog-headed men. Like it was a fact, And
So for me, my thing is and this is my opinion. I think studying these things, Bigfoot and Dogman, is interesting. But I think as believers in Christ, we should be careful not to fall too deep into that rabbit hole when we start getting our lives are just inundated with thinking about these things. And though interesting, these things are interdimensional. Like out here, not too far away, we have Yucca Valley and Joshua Tree, right? So if you've ever been up there, there's nothing out there. There's no fruit trees. There's no date palms to eat dates. There's nothing out there to eat. But people see the Yucca Man, which is another version of Bigfoot. So where in the heck is this big thing finding sustenance up there? It's got to be going somewhere else to eat and just. So this stuff is all, for me, this stuff is all spiritual. It's all really spiritual, and I think we have to be careful. We did an interview with JW, James Williams, and he talked about something that I never heard about. He talked about that infrasound that people hear on these creatures. Maybe you heard about it, Justin. And he said what that is, it's a spirit of that thing hitting you. And he says that's why some people, not everybody, but some people have shadow people in their homes after experiencing a Bigfoot or a Dogman and that, because they have this demonic minions around them, and they're the whole hitchhiker thing. They come and they follow you, and that's why a lot of people make documentaries about these things. They say, "Oh yeah, man, I heard something banging on my wall last night, or I saw a shadow person in my room, or a mist," or because they're delving into something they don't understand, and they don't. And this is my opinion. Did they get permission from Christ or a calling to do this? Or are they even followers of Christ? Because in my opinion, if they're not followers of Christ, I don't think anything's going to happen to them, because these things already have them spiritually. But for a believer in Christ who goes out there and does these things, the Bible says we should not seek these things out. I believe when some believers do that, and you hear it all the time, man, it's not news, but they get bombarded with shadow people and sleep paralysis, and after going out and looking for these things and seeing one or hearing one. So I don't know, Justin, what do you think, man? That's just my opinion.
No, I mean, I definitely agree, especially I spoke at a conference back in October at the land between the lakes up in Kentucky. And, that place is known for its cryptid activity, and did a presentation on this book before I published it. Vicky was a speaker there too, and she came and she did a presentation on Phobator, the Greek god of dreams and nightmares. And she spoke just specifically on exactly what you talked about, and it was really good. And that was one of those things that I already kind of knew in my heart of hearts, but never really sat down and thought it out thoroughly, and fleshed it out. But she did a really good job with that. And she said, exactly what you were saying. She was like, we're to expose the darkness, and, we're supposed to do these things. She said, you have to be, called to do it, and you have to be prayed up to do it, because you are seeking these things out, and you're going to get attachments, and you're coming at them, trying to expose them. They're going to come at you. And like you said, there's this old saying in the South, I'm from the hills of East Tennessee. We're a bunch of hillbillies over here. So we're all about some, good old boy logic and some phrases, but one of the things that I've heard since I was a kid was, if you've never met the devil face to face, it's because you're walking in the same direction. And like you said, if you're a non-believer, yeah, you're good, because they got you right where they want you anyway. And I'm sure you guys can vouch, just even doing something as simple as we're doing. We're not going out and trying to cast out demons and hunt cryptids and do paranormal research and stuff like that. We're just exposing the darkness and talking about it on podcasts. But I think I can speak for all three of us here. We've encountered some heavy spiritual warfare just by talking about these things. So I can only imagine what kind of mess you'd be stepping into, actually physically going out after these things.
Yeah, especially if you're open to it, especially if you're one of those people that, because a lot of these people think that, they're just, if you're nice to them, they're going to be your friend. I mean, come on, man. These things are going to tear you apart. You hear stories all the time of people getting torn apart, or you see a bear being killed by these things. The funny thing is, I just did a podcast a couple months ago. My friend Greg, he went through some crazy stuff as a child, SRA, satanic abuse, the whole nine, man. Really good guy, man. Came out of it.
Greg Reed?
Greg. Yes, Greg. You know what I'm talking about? Yes.
Yeah, so Dr. Greg Reed, yeah.
No. He's not a doctor, though. Might be a different one. But anyways, he lived out in, I think it was Washington, out, we're in the forest, out in the hills. And he told me, because this guy's seen a lot of things, man. But anyways, he was driving out, on the road. Those roads, it's like it's only two ways, like in the movies. You have all these pine trees. He said if he saw a massive bear running down a hill, and he said he was looking at it, he said, "What is that?" He said, "Is that a bear?" "Yeah, it's a bear." And then the bear's running like for its life. And then he looks behind it, he sees a Bigfoot chasing it. And, and the image I have in my head is just so crazy, because a bear is such a fierce animal. It's not really scared of anything. And just to imagine that this thing is so intimidating that a bear is running for its life. So this whole thing got even crazier. So that bear ran across the street and it got smacked by a what do you call it? A diesel truck. Boom. hit that thing. He said after that, he said the Bigfoot stopped, and then he said it walked around, and when it was walking, it was passing trees. And it says when it passed like 3 or 4 trees, it just disappeared. You know, kind of like there's a tree here and you see it walking and it doesn't come out the other side. So like, and this is like, and you know, I've interviewed about 20 people that have said they seen Bigfoot, and none of these people know each other. They're all different ages, all different, you know, views, and they all say the same thing. They disappear. They're, you know, they can cloak themselves. Like Dominic said, I think it was Ron Moore, he said you got to, you know, they find a piece of hair of evidence of it, and it said like the hair see-through, kind of like you know, a polar bear. Polar bears are not actually white. They're just like, you know, they're actually black, but the hair, he said it was like almost the same kind of texture for the hair. So what do you think about that, Justin? It's a wild story, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that would definitely make you not want to go for a walk in the woods for a while. That's for sure.
And let me get even more. So he said, because he lived out there for a while, he said one day he was, this was after he saw the Bigfoot. He said one day he was walking around the woods, you know, with his dog doing his thing. And he said, I have pictures too. I can send him to just remind me. I have pictures of all this stuff he sent me. And he said he found like this little area where there wasn't too many trees, like an open area. And he said there was animal bones all like stacked up in a very nice, neat way. Like there was like, you know, I forgot what he said. I think there were like deers or something like that. Deers and dogs and fox heads, skulls all stacked up, the skulls. And then around it were just like the bones making like a circle. And he's out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. There's nobody around there but him. Like the nearest neighbor is like 300 acres away. So, I mean, in his opinion, he's like, you know, is this the Bigfoot? Is this like, you know, some kind of ritual? Maybe they summoned it. I mean, who knows? You ever heard of anything like that?
I've heard stories and stuff, but one thing that I found researching this is, and I argue that I think that we see remnants of it throughout history, like the theory of entropy. You know, you cannot negate entropy. I mean, we can visually see that every single day. You know, nothing gets better with time. It gets worse with time. You set an apple out on your kitchen table, within a couple of weeks, that thing's going to start to rot, you know, and you're going to get gnats and your bones, your body starts to break down. DNA starts to break down. Interbreeding, you know, dilutes the gene pool. You know, you guys mentioned Gary Wayne, so I'm sure you've had several conversations with him about the royal bloodlines and how they kept interbreeding with each other to try to keep the bloodline pure. But as you interbreed, you kind of breed out certain genetics. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. And even you get hints of this, I think, in movies. Hollywood, you know, the people that are in the know kind of give you hints of the truth. I reference it in the book, but back in the 80s, remember that Teen Wolf, Michael J. Fox?
Yes, one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, I think that's another hint at this wild man, because he starts going through this change, right? And remember, he keeps fighting it off by splashing water on his face, like only his hand would turn, but then he'd get it to stop, or his eyes would turn yellow and he'd get them to stop. But the first night he actually like fully wolfs out. It's a full moon. Remember, he runs upstairs and his dad's sitting in the recliner, and he runs by him, runs upstairs and goes in there and slams the bedroom door. And he ends up wolfing completely out. And his dad's beating on the door. He's like, "Son, you've been acting real strange lately. What's going on? Let me in." He's like, "No, Dad, no." He's like, "Son, let me in." He's like, "No, you don't want to see me like this." He's like, "Son, you know, there's nothing you can do to make me not love you. You know, open the door." And he's like, "Okay, you asked for it. You remember that?" And he opens the door, and there's his old man standing fully wolfed out. And he's like, "Holy shit, Dad, you didn't tell me." You know, and he's freaking out. And he was like, "Son, sometimes this thing," what does he say? "It skips generations." We were hoping that it skipped you.
Wow.
And I think that's something that we actually see, man. And when you actually go through history, there's historically and scientifically documented people that have this thing that the scientists have labeled hypertrichosis, where they're born covered in hair from head to toe like a hairy cloak. And some people call them the wolf man or the bearded lady. These are the people that got put in freak shows. One famous prime example is Luis Gomez from, I think it was Spain. But he basically was sold to the king as like a toy for entertainment at 10 years old. But the king fell in love with this little boy and raised him as his son. And he went to the finest schools. He went to school and became a lawyer. All the paintings, he looks just like Michael J. Fox's dad, fully wolfed out, but dressed as a nobleman. He lived a good life. But when the king died, he wrote in his will that this guy was going to get a piece of land, a title, a castle. They arranged for him a marriage. So he married this woman, had 4 kids, which I think 3 of them ended up getting this same thing, and 2 of them were girls. So there's 2 little girls in pink dresses covered in hair from head to toe. And they theorized that the story of the Beauty and the Beast was based off of this marriage between this Gomez guy and this woman. And so you see all this stuff. I mean, it's scientifically documented.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so like when you go to China, you got the urine. You go to Europe, they call it the wild man. You come to North America, they call it the city ka or Bigfoot. And there's remnants of it everywhere. Europe has, what's that, Krampus.
Yep.
Right? You go down to Sardinia. They have this archaic ritual that they do. And when you ask the people, nobody knows where it comes from or where it started. They said that they've done it forever. They trace it back to like archaic times. But during the winter solstice, the men cover themselves in black goat's fur, put a wooden mask on their face, a black wooden mask, and strap copper bells to their back. And it says they dance through the streets and they abduct and chase the women and have their way with the women. And during this festival, the children that are coming of age, as like a rite of passage, they light a huge bonfire and the kids have to pass through the fire. These are all shouting, echoing back to these Amalekites and these Nephilim giants and these sorcerers and their practices. It shows you, in my opinion, the migration of these people.
Yeah, just to interject on that. Yeah, everything you're saying, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think all these things that you're saying are 100% on point. You're connecting all the dots and just even more so like the story Beauty and the Beast. I mean, like I never really thought to connect all that, but now that you have me thinking about it, I mean, that's a children's movie and nobody ever like questions, well, this woman is sleeping with a monster. You know what I mean? Like it's supposed to be a kid show and no one really like, I've never heard anybody say, man, this is a sick movie because I believe the original story at the end, he stays a beast. And he doesn't turn back into a human. So this is telling us that she's going to marry this monster and she's going to be sleeping with them, doing, all the things you do with the human. I think that's kind of sick. I guess it's sick.
Well, you remember that child book? Remember Where the Wild Things Are?
Yeah. That's another one too.
This kid goes to this land. There's these hairy wild beasts. And what do they do when he washes up on shore? They try to eat him. They're cannibals.
Yep.
And look, here's a picture of a little girl. It's in my book, taken from a newspaper.
Dude,
she looks like Teen Wolf, covered in hair from head to toe.
Oh, wow.
This is a real thing, guys.
That's a real picture, right?
Yes, it's out of a newspaper.
How long ago was that?
I can't remember, but I got it cited in here. It was the star.com is where I got it from.
Oh, that's crazy, man. Like this stuff
I'm
is
try to find that. There it is. That picture of that Luis Gomez guy.
Okay, yeah. I see that. Yeah. Oh, wow. So I want to ask your opinion on something. What do you think? I think his name is Saint Christopher. He was depicted as a dog-headed person in the pictures. Even his armor that they have is fixed to fit a head of a dog. What do you think about that? Because that story, some people say it's an allegory, it's a metaphor. So why would they go out of their way to make this armor to fit his head and his face and paint him as a dog? Every description of him is some kind of dog-headed person. And it goes back to Dominant's question, can the Nephilim be saved? Because if this story is true and he's a dogman, I believe it. I believe he gets saved and he becomes a saint, right? Do you know?
Yeah, honestly, I've not looked into that. I've heard the story and I've seen the pictures. That's something I've never honestly looked into. So, I have no idea on the story. I don't even know really the baseline. I've overheard in circles and seen, like, through scrolling and stuff, that there was a saint depicted like with a dog head, but I never really took the time to look into it.
You should really look into that. It is so interesting. I could just tell that you're going to like it, but I'll give you a quick summary. So basically this dog-headed person, his mission was to worship the most powerful God. And really quick, what he assumed in the world, he's like, okay, Satan must be the most powerful God because, when something bad happens, God doesn't come down and stop it. You know what I mean? That was his thought. Oh, if God is so powerful, well, I can do this and I can do that, and God's not going to stop me. Satan allows me to do what I want. But then I forgot exactly what happened to him, but something happened to him where he called on the name of God, and everything and whatever was happening, something evil was about to happen to him. I think it was a spiritual attack, and it went away. It seized it. So in that moment, he had a revelation. He's like, okay, Satan's a very powerful God. This is his world. But right now, this entity that tried to attack me, it cowered in fear just to the name. So this God has to be the God and the most powerful God. And then from then on, he becomes a saint. He does, he goes to war, protects the village, all this stuff. He even saves a little boy drowning in the river. He holds him on his back. And then that's another one too. So he saves a little boy, and he's walking in this river, and it's going really hard. And he's trying to get across, and the boy feels heavy, super heavy on him. So he's walking in there, and he's like, man, why is this kid so heavy? I'm a big, the way he's depicted is like 7 feet tall, this thing. And long story short, he ends up finding out that it was that it was God on his back in the form of a child, and he was like, giving him some kind of a parable. But yeah, you should check it out, dude. Right?
Yeah.
Dominic, what you got to say?
That's definitely interesting.
Dominic, your mic's on right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about when people go out there and look for Bigfoot, they come upon these rock structures. These rocks, they're all.
They build the little rocks, like those balance rocks.
Yeah, they make a little mound of them, right? And you see a lot of people that find these things out when they're looking for this monster. They'll leave, like a protein bar or a drink or, a piece of chicken or something. And that's another thing that I learned, that we learned from James Williams. He says these stone structures are altars that they build for you to bring your paying homage to him. Maybe it's a passage to their land that they want you to leave something for them, something to eat, a deer carcass or something. He says these things are altars, and this goes back all the way to the Old Testament. The building of altars and sacrifices and stuff. So that's a big rabbit hole. Who are you giving these if it's not an animal you killed, if it's something you're paying homage by bringing them food, apples, whatever. There's something greater than these Bigfoots or Dogmans that they're under their authority, under their power. And these altars are the way to pay homage to this entity, which, in my opinion, more like is Satan or his dominions, his minions. So I thought I'd throw that out there for people who are looking for these things, man. If you're a believer in Christ, don't be doing that unless you want these things to, these shadow people and demons that follow you back at your house and, knock you around at night and pound on your door and slap you upside the head because, man, they do that. Since we've been doing this podcast, I've been attacked a few times. Last time I was attacked was, a month ago, 2 months ago? Something, just a force, just hit me in the side of the head. Boom! It wasn't a punch, a solid punch. It's more of a solid push. And dude, my head right here, my neck hurt for like 3 days. And those are the things that, when you're exposing darkness, like Vicky Joy says, you're gonna get attacked because Satan don't like that. If you don't believe in God, he don't care. You can do whatever you want. He's happy you not believing in anything.
Hey guys, what's happening? Hope you enjoyed that highlight reel. Hey, if you want the full conversation, be sure to go down to the description. I have links to the Spotify and Apple RSS feed. Go there, click the link. It'll take you to my RSS feed, and there you can enjoy the full conversation. Torch is high.